Once upon a time, in a small town nestled between rolling hills, there lived a young girl named Emma. She had kind eyes that sparkled with warmth, despite the sadness she carried in her heart. Emma had lost both her parents when she was very little. Her father had been a kind and gentle man who loved her dearly. Before he died, he had married Mrs. Grace, hoping to give Emma a mother's love. But after his passing, everything changed. Mrs. Grace and her two daughters, Sonia and Laura, showed their true colors. They were proud and cruel, and they began to treat Emma not as family, but as a servant in her own home. "Emma, where is my breakfast?" Sonia would shout from her bedroom each morning, her shrill voice echoing through the house. "And don't forget to press my new dress," Laura would add, examining her reflection in the mirror with a satisfied smile. Emma would hurry from room to room, her bare feet padding softly on the cold floors. She cooked, she cleaned, she mended their clothes, and she never complained. At night, while Sonia and Laura slept in warm, comfortable beds with silk sheets, Emma curled up on a thin mat in the attic, wrapped in a threadbare blanket. One particularly cold morning, as Emma scrubbed the kitchen floor, Mrs. Grace swept into the room, her long skirts rustling importantly. "The floor is still dirty, you lazy girl," Mrs. Grace said, though the floor gleamed spotlessly. "And when you're finished here, you'll need to weed the entire garden before sunset." "Yes, ma'am," Emma whispered, her hands red and raw from the icy water. "And don't yes ma'am me with that pathetic voice," Mrs. Grace snapped. "You should be grateful we even keep you here. Where would you be without us?" Emma bit her lip to keep from crying. She wanted to say that this was her father's house, that she had more right to be here than any of them. But she remained silent, knowing that speaking up would only make things worse. Despite her hardships, Emma never lost her gentle spirit. She would talk kindly to the birds that visited the garden, share her meager meals with the stray cats, and hum soft melodies while she worked. The neighbors noticed how she was treated, and their hearts ached for the sweet girl. "That poor child," old Mrs. Henderson would say, watching Emma hang laundry in the freezing morning air. "She deserves so much better." But Emma held on to hope. Deep in her heart, she believed that one day, things would change. She remembered her father's words, "Kindness is never wasted, my dear Emma. Even in the darkest times, keep your heart light." And so she did, day after day, waiting for the moment when her life would finally transform. The first rays of dawn had not yet broken through the darkness when Emma's eyes fluttered open. She had learned to wake before the roosters crowed, before the town stirred to life. It was the only way to finish all her chores before her stepmother's harsh voice would begin its daily assault. Shivering in the cold attic, Emma wrapped the thin blanket around her shoulders and descended the creaky wooden stairs. Her stomach growled with hunger. She hadn't eaten since yesterday's meager lunch of stale bread and water, but there was no time to think about that now. In the kitchen, Emma lit the stove and began preparing breakfast. The aroma of fresh bread, eggs, and sausages filled the air. Her mouth watered as she watched the golden eggs sizzle in the pan, but she knew none of this was for her. "Emma." Mrs. Grace's voice shattered the peaceful morning like breaking glass. "Why isn't my tea ready yet? Do you expect me to die of thirst?" "I'm sorry, ma'am." "It's brewing now," Emma called back, her hands trembling as she quickly poured the hot water over the tea leaves. Heavy footsteps thundered down the stairs, and Mrs. Grace appeared in the doorway, her face twisted in anger. She was already dressed, her hair perfectly arranged. "Sorry? Sorry doesn't bring me my tea, does it?" She swept over to the stove and glared at the breakfast Emma had prepared. "These eggs look overcooked. Are you trying to poison us?" "No, ma'am, Silence. Mrs. Grace's hand struck the counter with a sharp crack. "I don't want to hear your pathetic excuses. You'll remake them, and you'll do it properly this time." Emma nodded, blinking back tears as she scraped the perfectly cooked eggs into the waste bin. As she began cracking fresh eggs, Sonia and Laura drifted into the kitchen, both wearing beautiful new dresses that rustled as they moved. "Mother, look at Emma," Sonia said with a cruel laugh, pointing at Emma's tattered dress. The hem was torn, and there were patches sewn clumsily over holes. She looks like a scarecrow. Can't we at least give her something decent to wear? She's embarrassing. Why should we waste good fabric on her? Laura chimed in, settling into her chair at the dining table. Besides, servants don't need fancy clothes. Exactly right, my darlings, Mrs. Grace said, patting Lara's shoulder affectionately. She turned to Emma with cold eyes. You should be grateful you have anything to wear at all. Your father left us with barely enough money to keep this household running. Every scrap of food you eat, every thread on your back, it all comes from my generosity. Emma wanted to scream that this was a lie, that her father had left them comfortable, that Mrs. Grace spent money freely on luxuries for herself and her daughters. But she held her tongue and focused on cooking the new batch of eggs. When you're finished with breakfast, Mrs. Grace continued, you'll wash all the bed linens, scrub the floors in every room, weed the garden, and prepare dinner. And don't even think about touching the food before we're finished eating. Yes, ma'am, Emma whispered. The family ate their breakfast at the polished dining table while Emma stood in the corner, watching them devour the meal she had prepared. Her stomach cramped with hunger, but she remained still and silent. After they finished, Emma gathered the dirty dishes and leftovers, a few crusts of bread and some cold potatoes, which would be her only meal until evening. As she scrubbed the dishes in cold water, her hands aching, she could hear Sonia and Laura laughing in the parlor, planning their day of leisure. Emma. Mrs. Grace's voice rang out again. These dishes better be spotless, or you'll wash them again. And don't take all day about it. Emma scrubbed harder, her vision blurring with exhaustion and unshed tears. 3 months had passed since that cold morning, and Emma's life had settled into its familiar, miserable routine. But one afternoon, everything changed when 3 stern-looking merchants arrived at the front door. Emma was scrubbing the front steps when she heard the heavy knock. Mrs. Grace appeared, smoothing her dress and putting on her sweetest smile before opening the door. Good afternoon, gentlemen, she said with false cheerfulness. How may I help you? The tallest merchant, a man with a thick beard and cold eyes, stepped forward. Mrs. Grace, we've come to collect the money you owe us. It's been 6 months now, and you've made no payments. Emma watched from the corner as all color drained from her stepmother's face. I need just a little more time, Mrs. Grace stammered, her confident demeanor crumbling. Business has been slow, and... We've heard enough excuses, another merchant interrupted sharply. You owe us 500 gold coins. If you cannot pay by week's end, we'll seize this house and everything in it. Mrs. Grace stumbled backward, clutching her chest dramatically. No, please. This is my home, my daughter's home. You can't do this to us. Sonia and Laura had rushed to the hallway at the sound of raised voices. They clung to each other, their faces pale with shock. Mother, what's happening? Laura cried. What do they mean? Hush, darling, Mrs. Grace said, but her voice trembled. She turned back to the merchants, wringing her hands. Surely we can come to some arrangement? There must be another way. The third merchant, an older man with gray hair, spoke more gently. Actually, there might be. We heard something in the village today that could solve your problem. Mrs. Grace leaned forward eagerly. What? Tell me. There's a man, James Turner, a carpenter, who's looking to marry, and he's willing to pay a substantial sum to the family of his bride. Nothing like what you owe us, of course, but if we combined what he offers with whatever you could scrape together. How much would he pay? Mrs. Grace asked, her mind clearly calculating. 400 gold coins, the bearded merchant replied. He's not wealthy, just a simple tradesman, but he's saved carefully. He wants a wife to help him manage his home and eventually give him children. Mrs. Grace's eyes darted between her 2 daughters, then landed on Emma, who was still frozen on the steps. A slow, cruel smile spread across her face. My girls are too beautiful and refined for a poor man, she said, gesturing towards Sonia and Laura. They deserve wealthy husbands who can give them the life they're accustomed to. But that useless Emma. She pointed directly at Emma. She will do perfectly. Emma's heart stopped. The world seemed to tilt around her. What? She whispered. Yes. Mrs. Grace clapped her hands together, warming to the idea. It's perfect. Emma can marry this carpenter, he'll pay the bride price, and our debt will be settled. No. Emma dropped the scrub brush and rushed forward, falling to her knees before her stepmother. Please, stepmother, don't make me do this. I don't even know him. I've never met this man. Mrs. Grace looked down at her with disgust. Be quiet. You should be grateful someone even wants to marry a girl like you. Look at you, you're nothing but a servant, barely worth the scraps you eat. But mother, Sonia interjected, though not out of concern for Emma, what if this carpenter refuses her? She's so plain and poorly dressed. We'll clean her up, Mrs. Grace said dismissively. The man is desperate for a wife. He won't be particular. Emma's tears fell freely now. Please, I'm begging you. Don't sell me like I'm property. You are property. Mrs. Grace shouted, her face turning red with anger. Everything you have, everything you are, belongs to me. Your father left you in my care, and I'll do with you as I see fit. The bearded merchant cleared his throat. So we have an agreement? You'll arrange the marriage. Mrs. Grace smiled viciously. We do indeed, gentlemen. We most certainly do. The next morning arrived far too quickly. Emma had barely slept, her mind racing with fear and desperation. Before the sun had fully risen, Mrs. Grace burst into the attic, dragging Emma from her mat. Get up. Today is your wedding day, she said with mock cheerfulness, though her eyes glinted with satisfaction. We can't keep your groom waiting. Emma's hands shook as Mrs. Grace forced her into a simple white dress, not out of kindness, but to make her presentable enough for the transaction. Sonia and Laura watched from the doorway, whispering and giggling. I almost feel sorry for her, Laura said, though her tone suggested otherwise. Married to a poor woodcutter. How dreadful. Better her than us, Sonia replied, examining her nails. Can you imagine living in poverty? I'd rather die. Within the hour, Emma found herself standing in the town square beside a man she'd never met. James Turner was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing clothes that had clearly seen better days, patched trousers, a faded shirt, and a worn coat. His face was partially hidden by an overgrown beard, and he walked with a noticeable limp, leaning on a wooden cane. The ceremony was brief and cold. The village magistrate mumbled through the words while a small crowd gathered to watch, their faces filled with pity and amusement. Look at poor Emma, one woman whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. Married off to that beggar woodcutter. What a shame. I heard her stepmother sold her to pay off debts, another voice added. Sold her own stepdaughter like livestock. Well, what did the girl expect? An old man chimed in. She's nobody special. At least she'll have a roof over her head, even if it's just a pathetic little hut. The laughter that followed cut through Emma like knives. She kept her eyes down, tears streaming silently down her cheeks as the magistrate pronounced them husband and wife. James said nothing throughout the entire ceremony. He simply nodded when required and signed the documents. When Mrs. Grace eagerly collected the payment, a heavy pouch of gold coins, she didn't even look at Emma one last time. Come, James finally spoke, his voice rough and quiet. We should go. Emma followed him through the town streets, her vision blurred by tears. People lined the roads, pointing and whispering as they passed. There goes the woodcutter's wife. Poor girl, married to a cripple. I give it a month before she runs away. The walk seemed endless. They left the town center, past the neat rows of comfortable houses, and continued into the outskirts where the road became rough and unpaved. Emma's feet ached, and her heart felt like it had shattered into 1,000 pieces. "Please," she finally whispered, her voice breaking. "How much farther?" James didn't turn around. "Not far now." Emma wiped her tears with the back of her hand, trying to compose herself, but it was useless. Fresh tears kept coming. Everything she'd feared had come true. She'd been sold like property, married to a man she didn't know, a man everyone called poor and worthless. "I can't believe this is happening," she sobbed quietly. "My life is over. Completely over." James stopped walking and glanced back at her, his expression unreadable beneath his beard. For a moment, Emma thought he might say something, but he simply turned and continued limping down the path. They walked in silence for another 20 minutes until they reached a small, weathered hut surrounded by dense forest. The roof sagged in places, the windows were dark, and the whole structure looked like it might collapse in a strong wind. "This is it," James said flatly, pushing open the creaking door. "Your new home." Emma stepped into the dim hut, her arms wrapped around herself protectively. She expected the worst, a dirty, uncomfortable hovel that matched the rumors she'd heard. But as her eyes adjusted to the light, she was surprised to find the space clean and orderly. A simple wooden table sat in the center, 2 chairs tucked neatly beneath it. A small fireplace crackled with warmth in the corner, and there was even a modest bed covered with what appeared to be clean linens. James closed the door behind them and limped over to the fireplace, adding another log. The silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable. Emma remained frozen near the entrance, unsure of what to do or say. Her stepmother had never prepared her for marriage. She'd been too busy using Emma as a servant. Now, standing in this stranger's home as his wife, Emma felt completely lost. "You must be hungry," James said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was surprisingly gentle, nothing like the harsh tones she was used to hearing. Emma's stomach growled at the mention of food, betraying her. She'd barely eaten anything yesterday, and nothing at all this morning. I don't want to be a burden," she whispered. James turned to look at her, and even through his scraggly beard, she could see something softer in his eyes. "You're not a burden. You're my wife now. Sit down, please." Hesitantly, Emma moved to the table and sat on one of the chairs. She watched nervously as James limped to a small cupboard and began pulling out bread, cheese, and dried fruit. He set them on the table before her, along with a cup of fresh water. "Eat," he said simply, settling into the chair across from her. Emma stared at the food, then at him. "Aren't you going to eat as well?" "I ate earlier. This is for you." Slowly, carefully, Emma reached for a piece of bread. She half expected him to snatch it away, some cruel joke, but he simply watched her with patient eyes. When she took her first bite, the relief was overwhelming. The bread was fresh and soft, better than the stale scraps she'd been living on. They sat in silence while Emma ate. She tried to pace herself, to eat like a lady, but hunger won over manners. When she finally finished, she looked up to find James still watching her, his expression unreadable. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That was very kind." James leaned back in his chair, and Emma heard the quiet creak of his cane resting against the table. "You don't have to thank me for feeding you. That's just basic decency." Emma's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they weren't tears of despair. "My stepmother never thought so. Neither did her daughters." "I heard about how they treated you," James said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "The whole town knew, and yet no one did anything to stop it." "They couldn't," Emma said, wiping her eyes. "Mrs. Grace was fearful. And I had nowhere else to go." James was quiet for a moment, then he spoke again, softer this time. "You don't have to be afraid of me, Emma. I won't hurt you. I won't force you to do anything you don't want to do." He paused, and when he continued, his words shocked her. "If you want to leave, If you want to go back or find somewhere else, you can. I won't stop you. Emma looked up sharply, confusion written across her face. What? But you paid for me. The debt. That debt wasn't yours to bear, James interrupted. You were treated like property, and that was wrong. You're a person, Emma. You deserve to make your own choices. Emma stared at this strange man, this supposed poor woodcutter that everyone pitied and mocked. He was offering her freedom, something she'd never truly had. She could leave right now, walk away from this marriage that had been forced upon her. But where would she go? Back to Mrs. Grace's cruelty? Out into the world alone with nothing to her name? And more importantly, did she want to leave? She looked around the small hut again, at the warm fire, the comfortable bed, the evidence of someone who lived simply but with dignity. She looked at James, who despite his shabby clothes and apparent poverty, had shown her more kindness in 1 hour than her stepmother had in years. No, Emma said finally, her voice growing stronger. I will stay. You are kind. That is more than I ever had before. Something flickered in James's eyes, surprise perhaps, or relief. He nodded slowly. Then you're welcome here, truly welcome, for as long as you wish to stay. For the first time in years, Emma felt a small spark of hope kindle in her chest. The days that followed were unlike anything Emma had ever experienced. Each morning, she woke not to harsh shouts and demands, but to the gentle crackling of the fireplace and the soft light filtering through the small windows. James was always awake before her, preparing breakfast, a kindness that still left her bewildered. On the third morning, Emma sat up quickly when she smelled fresh porridge cooking. She rushed from the bed, smoothing her dress nervously. I'm sorry. I should have been up earlier to cook for you, she said, hurrying toward the fire. James looked up from stirring the pot, surprise crossing his face. There's no need to apologize. You needed rest. But I should be taking care of the household duties. That's what a wife does, isn't it? Emma wrung her hands together anxiously. I can cook, clean, mend clothes. I'm quite good at it, actually. Please, let me help. James studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. If you'd like to help, I won't stop you. But Emma, you're not my servant. You're my partner. We share the work here. Partner. The word felt strange and wonderful on her ears. Emma had never been anyone's partner before. As the days turned into weeks, Emma began to find her rhythm in this new life. She discovered that James spent his days in the forest, cutting wood and crafting simple furniture to sell in town. True to his word, he never demanded anything of her, but Emma found herself wanting to contribute. She cleaned the hut until it sparkled, organized their meager belongings, and began preparing meals that made the small space smell like a real home. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire together, and slowly, carefully, they began to talk. Tell me about your father, James said one evening as they shared a simple dinner of vegetable stew. Emma's eyes grew distant with memory. He was wonderful. Gentle and kind, always smiling. He used to call me his little songbird because I loved to sing. Her voice caught. Everything changed when he died. James reached across the table, hesitating just before touching her hand. I'm sorry you lost him. What about your family? Emma asked, grateful for his sympathy but wanting to shift the focus from her pain. You never speak of them. A shadow crossed James's face. My parents died when I was young too. I've been on my own for a long time. Then we're both orphans in a way, Emma said softly, and when their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of shared loneliness. One afternoon, Emma was hanging laundry outside when she noticed James struggling to carry several heavy logs. He leaned heavily on his cane, his limp more pronounced than usual. Let me help you, she called out, rushing over. I can manage, he said, but she could hear the strain in his voice. Please don't be stubborn, Emma said, already reaching for one of the logs. You said we're partners, remember? Partners help each other. James looked at her, and for the first time, she saw him truly smile, not just a polite expression, but a genuine smile that reached his eyes and made something flutter in her chest. "You're right," he said, allowing her to take some of the weight. "Thank you, Emma." Working side by side, they carried the wood to the small shed behind the hut. When they finished, both slightly out of breath, Emma found herself laughing, actually laughing, for the first time in years. "What's funny?" James asked, leaning on his cane. "I don't know," Emma said, still smiling. I think I'm happy. It's strange. I never thought I could be happy again." James's expression softened. "You deserve happiness, Emma. You deserve so much more than what life has given you." The way he looked at her made Emma's heart skip. She quickly looked away, suddenly shy. "You've already given me more than you know." That evening, as they sat by the fire, Emma found herself stealing glances at James. She noticed things she hadn't before: the way his hands were strong and capable despite his limp, the intelligence in his eyes, the gentleness in every gesture he made. She didn't know what this feeling was that had begun to grow in her heart, but it felt warm and safe, like coming home after a long journey through the cold. "James," she said quietly. "Yes. I'm glad I stayed." He turned to her, and in his eyes, she saw something that mirrored her own emerging feelings. "So am I, Emma. So am I." A month had passed since Emma's arrival at the small hut, and life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Yet as the days went by, Emma began to notice peculiarities that didn't quite fit the image of a poor woodcutter struggling to survive. It started one morning when she was tidying the small table. James had left early for the forest, and Emma was humming softly as she worked, something she'd started doing again, finding her voice after years of silence. As she moved a stack of old newspapers, something golden caught the light. Emma's breath caught. Nestled beneath the papers was an elegant pocket watch, its surface gleaming with unmistakable quality. She picked it up carefully, feeling its weight. This wasn't some cheap trinket from the market. This was expensive, possibly worth more than everything else in the hut combined. "Strange," she whispered to herself, turning it over in her hands. The back was engraved with initials she didn't recognize. She quickly placed it back where she'd found it, covering it with the newspapers exactly as before. Perhaps it was a family heirloom, she reasoned. Something he'd kept from better times. But then, a week later, while putting away clean laundry, Emma discovered a locked wooden box tucked under James's side of the bed. It wasn't hidden exactly, but it wasn't in plain sight either. As she pushed it back into place, the lid shifted slightly, revealing its contents. Inside were clothes, fine clothes. A crisp white shirt made of material far superior to the patched, worn garments James wore daily. Dark trousers that looked new and expensive. Even a silk handkerchief embroidered with delicate patterns. Emma's mind raced with questions, but she carefully closed the box and slid it back under the bed. She said nothing when James returned that evening, simply serving dinner as usual. The most puzzling incident came late one night, 2 weeks after finding the clothes. Emma had woken to use the chamber pot and heard James's voice coming from outside. She crept to the window and peered out. James stood in the moonlight, his back to the hut, holding something to his ear, a phone. Not just any phone, but one of those expensive smartphones she'd seen wealthy merchants using in town. The moonlight glinted off its sleek surface. "Yes, I understand," James was saying, his voice low but clear in the quiet night. "Invest it there, in the Eastern properties. The returns will be significant." He paused, listening. "Tell the company to send the documents tomorrow. I'll review them and sign by the end of the week." Emma's heart pounded. Companies? Investments? Documents? These were words she'd heard rich businessmen use in town, not poor woodcutters. And the quarterly reports? James continued. "Good. Make sure the board meeting is scheduled for the 15th. I'll attend remotely." Emma pulled back from the window, her mind spinning. She quickly returned to bed, pretending to be asleep when James came back inside minutes later. She heard him moving quietly, the soft sound of something being hidden away, and then the creak of the bed as he lay down beside her. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Over the following days, Emma watched James more carefully, though she tried not to be obvious. She noticed how sometimes his limp seemed less pronounced when he thought she wasn't looking. How his hands, though calloused from woodwork, were still too smooth for someone who'd been laboring all his life. How he sometimes used words and phrases that seemed too refined for a simple tradesman. One afternoon, while James was supposedly in town selling wood, Emma was sweeping the floor when she found a letter that had slipped behind the small bookshelf. She picked it up, not intending to snoop, but the letterhead caught her eye: Turner Industries, Executive Office. Her hands trembled as she stared at it. Turner. That was James's surname. "What's going on?" she whispered to the empty room. But even with all these discoveries, Emma said nothing. She remembered the kindness James had shown her, the gentleness, the respect. Whatever secrets he was keeping, he must have his reasons. Perhaps he was protecting himself, or protecting her. That evening, as they sat down to the simple meal she'd prepared, Emma watched James across the table. He smiled at her, that warm smile that had become so familiar, and thanked her for the food. "Emma," he said, noticing her thoughtful expression, "is everything all right?" She hesitated for just a moment, then smiled back. "Yes, everything's fine. I was just thinking how grateful I am to be here." It wasn't a lie. Whatever mysteries surrounded her husband, one thing remained true: he had given her kindness when the world had given her nothing but cruelty. And for now, that was enough. The mysteries surrounding James continued to pile up, but so did Emma's feelings for him. She found herself caught between curiosity and contentment, between wanting answers and fearing what those answers might change. One evening, Emma was preparing dinner when she heard unfamiliar sounds coming from outside, the distinct rumble of an expensive car engine, something that had no business being near a poor woodcutter's hut. She rushed to the window and glimpsed a sleek black vehicle disappearing down the forest path, leaving James standing alone with a leather briefcase she'd never seen before. He quickly hid it in the shed before entering the hut, his limp pronounced once more. "Something smells wonderful," he said, smiling as if nothing unusual had happened. Emma's heart raced, but she returned his smile. "Just potato soup. Nothing fancy." "Everything you make is wonderful," James said softly, and the sincerity in his voice made her blush. These moments of tenderness had become more frequent. Just last week, James had brought her wildflowers from the forest, presenting them shyly like a schoolboy. Emma had pressed one between the pages of an old book, wanting to preserve the memory. Another day, while they worked together in the small garden behind the hut, their hands had brushed while reaching for the same tool. They'd both frozen, eyes meeting, and for a breathless moment, neither had pulled away. "Emma," James had said then, his voice barely above a whisper, "I want you to know, having you here, it's changed everything for me." "For me too," she'd admitted, her cheeks warming. Now, as they sat down to dinner, Emma couldn't help but study him. Who was this man, really? Why did he pretend to be poor when clearly he wasn't? And why did it matter less and less with each passing day? "You're quiet tonight," James observed, reaching across the table to touch her hand. "What's on your mind?" Emma looked at their joined hands, his large and warm, hers small and delicate. She wanted to ask him everything. Instead she said, "I'm just happy." "Is that strange?" "Not strange at all," James replied, his thumb gently stroking her knuckles. "I'm happy too." That night, as they prepared for bed, the air between them felt different, charged with something unspoken. Emma was brushing her hair when James approached her slowly. "Emma," he said, his voice uncertain. "May I?" She nodded, and he took the brush from her hands, gently running it through her hair. The intimate gesture made her heart flutter. "You're so beautiful," he murmured. I don't think you realize it. Emma turned to face him, searching his eyes. James, He cupped her face in his hands, his touch achingly gentle. I know this marriage wasn't your choice. I know you were forced into it. But I want you to know. I care for you, Emma. Truly care for you. I care for you too, Emma whispered, tears pooling in her eyes, but these were good tears, happy tears. You've shown me what kindness looks like. What respect feels like. I never knew. James leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers. May I kiss you? Emma's breath caught. She'd been kissed once before years ago, a stolen kiss from a boy in the village that had meant nothing. But this felt momentous. Yes, she breathed. His lips met hers softly, tentatively, as if she were something precious that might break. Emma's eyes fluttered closed, and she leaned into the kiss, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. She could feel his heart pounding as hard as her own. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. James looked at her with such tenderness that Emma felt something break open in her chest, all the walls she'd built around her heart during those terrible years crumbling to dust. Stay with me, he whispered. Not because you have nowhere else to go, but because you want to. I want to, Emma said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. I want to stay with you, James. That night, they came together not as strangers bound by transaction, but as two lonely souls who had found unexpected solace in each other. Emma let go of her fears and questions, lost in the warmth of James's embrace and the tenderness of his touch. Later, as she lay in his arms listening to his steady heartbeat, Emma thought about all the strange things she'd witnessed, the expensive items, the mysterious phone calls, the hidden life he seemed to lead. She still didn't understand any of it. But somehow, wrapped in his protective embrace, it didn't seem to matter anymore. Whatever secrets James kept, she trusted that he had his reasons. And for now that trust, and the love growing between them, was enough. Emma woke to find James already dressed, but not in his usual worn clothes. He wore dark trousers and a clean shirt, still simple, but noticeably better than what he typically wore. He was pacing near the window, a nervous energy radiating from him that she'd never seen before. James. Emma sat up, rubbing her eyes. Is everything all right? He turned to her, and she saw something in his expression, determination mixed with apprehension. Emma, I need you to get ready. We're going to the city today. Emma's heart skipped. The city? But why? Is something wrong? Nothing's wrong, James assured her, coming to sit beside her on the bed. He took her hands in his. There's something I need to show you. Someone I want you to meet. But I don't have anything suitable to wear to the city, Emma said, looking down at her simple dress, the same one she'd been married in, now worn from daily use. James stood and walked to the wooden chest in the corner, the one Emma had discovered weeks ago. He opened it and pulled out a beautiful dress she'd never seen before, deep blue fabric with delicate embroidery, far finer than anything she'd ever owned. I got this for you, he said quietly. I was waiting for the right time. Emma stared at the dress, then at James, confusion and wonder mingling in her chest. James, how did you afford? Please, he interrupted gently. Just trust me. Get dressed, and I'll explain everything soon. I promise. An hour later, Emma stood outside the hut wearing the blue dress, her hair carefully arranged. She felt like a different person, not the servant girl or even the woodcutter's wife, but someone else entirely. Someone she didn't quite recognize. James stood beside her, also transformed. He'd shaved his scraggly beard, revealing a strong, handsome face that had been hidden all this time. Without the facial hair, he looked younger, more refined. And Emma noticed something else. He wasn't using his cane. James, your leg. Listen, he said, taking both her hands. There's so much I need to tell you, but... The sound of an approaching engine cut him off. Emma turned to see a sleek black car, the same one she'd glimpsed weeks ago, rolling down the forest path toward them. Her breath caught in her throat. A uniformed driver stepped out and opened the rear door. "Mr. Turner, Mrs. Turner. Good morning." "Thank you, Richard," James said calmly, as if this were the most normal thing in the world. Emma stood frozen. "James, what's happening? Who is this? Why is he calling you?" "Please, Emma," James said softly, guiding her toward the car. "Get in. I'll explain on the way." In a daze, Emma slid into the luxurious vehicle. The seats were soft leather, and the interior smelled of expensive cologne and polish. James settled beside her, and Richard closed the door before returning to the driver's seat. As the car began to move, Emma gripped James's hand tightly. "You need to tell me what's going on. Right now." James looked at her, his eyes filled with apprehension and something else, hope perhaps. "You're right. You deserve the truth." He took a deep breath. "Emma, I'm not who you think I am. I'm not a poor woodcutter. I never was." Emma's mind reeled. "Then who are you?" "My full name is James Alexander Turner. I'm the owner of Turner Industries, one of the largest manufacturing companies in the region." The world seemed to tilt. What? But the hut, the limp, the old clothes. All of it was a disguise, James admitted, his voice heavy with emotion. The limp was fake. I was pretending to be poor. But why? Emma's voice rose with a mixture of confusion and hurt. Why would you lie to me? I wasn't lying to you specifically, James said quickly. I'd been living that way for months before we met, and I had my reasons. Important reasons. Please, let me show you everything, and then you'll understand. Emma pulled her hand away, her emotions churning. Anger, betrayal, confusion, they all swirled together. You've been deceiving me this entire time? No, James said firmly. My feelings for you, everything between us, that was real. That is real. The only thing that wasn't real was my poverty. Emma turned to look out the window as the forest gave way to farmland, then to the outskirts of the city. Buildings grew taller, streets busier. She'd only been to the city a handful of times in her life, always as a servant trailing behind her stepmother and stepsisters. Where are we going? She asked quietly. To my home, James said. My real home. 20 minutes later, the car turned onto a tree-lined avenue where massive estates sat behind iron gates. Emma's eyes widened as they passed mansion after mansion, each more impressive than the last. Finally, the car slowed before enormous wrought iron gates adorned with an elaborate T design. The gates swung open automatically, and they drove up a long winding driveway. Emma gasped as a magnificent mansion came into view, 3 stories of elegant architecture, with columns flanking the entrance, pristine gardens stretching in every direction, and a fountain dancing in the circular courtyard. This is your home? Emma whispered, unable to process what she was seeing. The car stopped at the front entrance, and Richard opened the door. James stepped out first, then offered his hand to Emma. She took it on instinct, stepping out onto the cobblestone driveway in a complete daze. Before them, the massive front doors opened, and a line of servants appeared, maids in crisp uniforms, butlers in formal attire, all standing at attention. Welcome home, Mr. Turner, an elderly butler said with a dignified bow. His eyes shifted to Emma with curiosity and warmth. And welcome, Mrs. Turner. We've been eagerly awaiting your arrival. Emma looked at James, her mind struggling to connect the man beside her with the humble woodcutter she'd married. James guided Emma through the grand entrance, past the line of servants who bowed respectfully as they passed. Emma's legs felt weak, her mind spinning with too many thoughts at once. The marble floors gleamed beneath her feet, crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, and priceless artwork adorned the walls. They entered a spacious sitting room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured gardens. James closed the double doors behind them, giving them privacy. Emma stood in the center of the room, her arms wrapped around herself, trying to make sense of everything. "Please sit down," James said gently, gesturing to an elegant sofa. "I'd rather stand," Emma said, her voice trembling. "I need you to explain. All of it. Right now." James ran his hand through his hair, a nervous gesture she recognized even now. "You're right. You deserve the complete truth." He took a deep breath. 2 years ago, I inherited this estate and my family's company when my uncle passed away. Suddenly, I had more wealth than I could ever spend, and with it came complications. "What kind of complications?" Emma asked, her arms still wrapped protectively around herself. "People," James said simply. "So many people who wanted something from me. Women who saw only my bank account, who pretended to love me while calculating how much they could gain. Business associates who smiled to my face while plotting to manipulate me. I couldn't tell who was genuine and who was wearing a mask." He walked to the window, staring out at the grounds. "I became cynical, Emma. Bitter. I started to believe that genuine love was impossible for someone like me, that my wealth had poisoned any chance of finding something real." Emma listened, her anger beginning to soften into understanding, though hurt still lingered in her chest. "So I came up with a plan," James continued, turning back to face her. "I would disguise myself as someone poor, someone with nothing to offer except myself. I rented that little hut, adopted the appearance of a struggling woodcutter, even faked a limp to make myself seem less desirable. I wanted to see if anyone could care about me, just me, without the mansion, the cars, the money. And then my stepmother sold me to you," Emma whispered, the pieces falling into place. "Yes," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "When the merchants told me about your situation, about how you'd been treated, how you were being sold to pay someone else's debts, I saw an opportunity. But Emma, you have to understand, I never intended to trap you. That's why I told you on the first day that you could leave if you wanted to." Emma remembered that moment, remembered her surprise at his kindness. "But I chose to stay." "You did," James said, taking a tentative step toward her. "And in the weeks that followed, you showed me something I'd almost stopped believing existed. You were kind even when you had no reason to be. You cooked and cleaned not because I demanded it, but because you wanted to contribute. You asked about my day, laughed at my poor jokes, shared your stories with me." His voice cracked slightly. "You saw me, a supposedly poor, crippled woodcutter with nothing to offer, and you stayed anyway. You grew to care for me anyway. You chose me, Emma. Not my wealth, not my status. Just me." Emma's eyes filled with tears as the full weight of his words hit her. "So this was all a test? Our entire marriage?" "No." James closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "Maybe it started that way, but Emma, what we have, what we've built, that's real. My feelings for you are real. When I hold you, when I kiss you, when I wake up and see you beside me, that has nothing to do with any test or plan. I fell in love with you, Emma. Truly, deeply in love with you." A tear rolled down Emma's cheek. "You mean, you're a billionaire?" James nodded, squeezing her hands gently. "Yes. Turner Industries is worth hundreds of millions. This estate, the cars, the investments you heard me discussing, it's all real. But Emma, none of it means anything without someone genuine to share it with." He lifted one hand to wipe away her tear. "You passed a test I didn't even realize I was still giving. You showed me that true love exists, that someone could want me for my heart and not my money. And now I know I have found the right person, the only person I want by my side." Emma looked up at him, this man who was both a stranger and her husband, both a poor woodcutter and a billionaire. Her emotions warred within her, hurt that he deceived her, understanding of why he'd done it, and beneath it all, the undeniable truth that she loved him too. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "This is all so overwhelming." "You don't have to say anything right now," James said softly. "I know I've shocked you. I know you need time to process all of this. But Emma, please believe me when I say that everything between us was real. The man you fell in love with in that little hut, that's still me. This," he gestured around the opulent room, "is just the life I was born into. But you're the life I choose." Emma's tears flowed freely now, and she wasn't sure if they were tears of joy, confusion, or relief. Perhaps all three. "I love you too," she finally said, her voice barely audible. "I think I have for a while now. But James, I need you to promise me something." "Anything," he said immediately. "No more secrets. No more tests. If we're going to make this marriage work, truly work, I need complete honesty from now on." James pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "I promise. No more secrets. From this moment forward, complete honesty. You have my word." As Emma rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, she realized that her life had just transformed once again, but this time, it was a transformation she could embrace. News spread through the town like wildfire. Emma, the servant girl who'd been sold to a poor woodcutter, was actually married to James Turner, one of the wealthiest men in the region. The mansion, the fortune, the business empire, it was all hers now. 3 days after Emma's arrival at the mansion, the sound of frantic knocking echoed through the grand entrance hall. Emma was in the library with James, learning about his business holdings, when a servant appeared at the door. "Sir, madam, there are 3 women at the gate claiming to be Mrs. Turner's family," the butler announced with barely concealed disapproval. Emma's face paled. "My stepmother." James's jaw tightened. "Tell them to leave." "Wait," Emma said, standing up. "Let me see them. Please." "Emma, you don't owe them anything," James said firmly, taking her hand. "After what they did to you." "I know, but they're still family in a way. Maybe they've changed. Maybe they've realized how wrong they were." James's expression darkened. "People like that don't change, Emma. They'll only want something from you now that you have wealth." But Emma's kind heart, the same heart that had drawn James to her, couldn't turn them away without at least hearing what they had to say. "Please, James. Just let me talk to them." Against his better judgment, James nodded. "Fine. But I'm staying with you." Minutes later, Mrs. Grace burst into the drawing room, Sonia and Laura trailing behind her. All 3 were dressed in their finest clothes, their faces painted with expressions of exaggerated joy and concern. "Emma. My dear, sweet Emma." Mrs. Grace cried out, rushing forward with open arms. "Oh, how we've worried about you." Emma stood stiffly as her stepmother embraced her, the touch feeling foreign and wrong after months of freedom from her cruelty. "We heard the most wonderful news," Laura gushed, her eyes greedily taking in the opulent surroundings. "Our dear sister married to Mr. Turner. We're so happy for you." "Sister," James said coldly from where he stood beside Emma. "That's interesting. I heard you called her a servant and laughed when she was forced to marry a poor beggar." Mrs. Grace's smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered. "Oh, Mr. Turner, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. We loved Emma like our own. We were simply strict, yes, but only to prepare her for life. We never meant any harm." "You sold her to pay your debts," James said, his voice like ice. "We were desperate." Sonia jumped in, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief though no tears fell. "We thought we were giving her a chance at marriage, at a family of her own. We had no idea you were, well, wealthy. But we're so thrilled that Emma has found such happiness." Emma looked at the 3 women who had made her life miserable for years. She saw the false smiles, the calculating eyes, the way they kept glancing around at the expensive furnishings. Yet something in her, that same gentle, forgiving nature, wanted to believe people could change. "Emma," Mrs. Grace said, taking her hand. "We know we weren't perfect, but we're family. And family should be together, shouldn't they? Especially now that you're in such a grand position." Surely you have room in this enormous house for your poor stepmother and sisters. Absolutely not, James said before Emma could respond. You've done enough damage. It's all right, James, Emma interrupted softly. She looked at her stepmother and stepsisters, searching their faces. You hurt me deeply. You treated me worse than a servant. You sold me like property. Mrs. Grace's face fell, but Emma continued. But I also know what it's like to have nothing, to be desperate. If you truly regret how you treated me, if you're genuinely sorry. She paused, and James squeezed her hand in warning. You can stay here. For a little while. To prove that you've changed. Emma, no, James said urgently, pulling her aside. This is a mistake. You're too trusting. These women will only bring trouble. Please, James, Emma whispered. I need to know if they can change. I need to give them a chance, the way you gave me a chance. That's completely different. Is it? Emma looked up at him with pleading eyes. You believed in me when no one else did. Let me extend that same grace to them. If they prove they haven't changed, then I'll ask them to leave. But at least let me try. James stared at her for a long moment, then sighed heavily. Against my better judgment, fine. But Emma, please be careful. Watch them closely. Emma smiled gratefully and turned back to her stepfamily. You may stay. But you'll be guests here, and you'll treat everyone in this house, including the servants, with respect. Oh, thank you, dear Emma. Mrs. Grace cried, embracing her again. You won't regret this. We'll be model guests, won't we, girls? Of course, Mother, Sonia and Laura chorused together, their smiles bright and empty. As the servants showed them to their rooms, James watched them go with deep suspicion. When they were alone again, he pulled Emma close. I hope you know what you're doing, he murmured. I have a very bad feeling about this. They'll be on their best behavior, Emma assured him, though even she felt a flicker of doubt. What's the worst that could happen? What Emma didn't know couldn't know, was that in the guest wing, Mrs. Grace was already gathering her daughters for a whispered conversation. This is perfect, Mrs. Grace hissed, her kind facade dropping like a mask. That foolish girl has given us exactly what we need, access to her home, her husband, her fortune. But Mother, she's married to him, Laura pointed out. How can we possibly? Simple, Mrs. Grace interrupted, her eyes glinting with malice. We get rid of Emma. An accident, perhaps. Something tragic. And then when James is grieving and vulnerable, one of you will step in to comfort him. You're both beautiful and charming when you try to be. He'll marry one of you eventually, and the fortune will be ours. Sonia's eyes widened with excitement and fear. You mean, kill her? Do you want to go back to that house with nothing? Mrs. Grace snapped. Do you want to live in poverty while your stepsister lives in luxury? This is our chance, our only chance, to have everything we deserve. And I won't let that ungrateful girl stand in our way. The three women looked at each other, and slowly, greed overcoming any remaining conscience, they nodded in agreement. When do we start? Sonia asked. Mrs. Grace smiled cruelly. Soon. Very soon. But we must be patient, careful. We'll wait for the perfect moment, and then, dear Emma will have a very unfortunate accident.